In the autumn, Plitvice Lakes in Croatia turns into a rainbow of greens, yellows and oranges. This is where I went to take the reference photo for this gouache painting. In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint different types of trees with gouache, including beech, maple, fir and spruce, how to paint leaf texture, mix an assortment of autumn colours and paint water reflections. I've listed the supplies in the description. The colours I've used were titanium white, spectrum red, burnt umber, yellow ochre, primary yellow, permanent green, ultramarine blue and ivory black. Essentially, I used the primary colours and the earth colours umber and ochre, and then ivory black for the shadow tones. Then I used a palette that closes and seals to keep the paint wet. I find this to be useful because I'll sometimes complete a painting in short sessions over multiple days, and this seals in the moisture. If you have any supplies you like using for gouache, let me know in the comments. I'm always interested to hear about different supplies. Before starting the painting, I usually tape the edges of the paper with masking tape, as this gives the painting a clean border. Then I sketch out the composition lightly with a pencil, so I broadly know where to place certain elements. If you want a clean horizon line, you could also put masking tape over this, or you could just sketch it out with a pencil. The horizon line is a little bit higher than halfway up the composition, and along this line, I'm going to draw the distant hilly forest on the left and the trees on the right that appear closer to the viewer. The reflections of the hill and trees create a mirrored shape in the lake, so I'm going to sketch that in and then start to layer colour over it. One thing I do after I squeeze the colours into the well of the palette is I spray each colour with a tiny bit of water. I don't spray too much so as not to dilute it, but just enough to keep it from drying out throughout the session. The first colour that I'm going to mix is the sky tone. On the day I visited the lakes, it was overcast but bright, so for the cloudy sky mix, I'm going to mix a tiny dot of ivory black with titanium white. This composition doesn't show much of the sky, so I don't need a lot of paint for this mix. I paint the light grey colour where I outline the sky, and then I wait a minute or two for it to dry, then layer some white over the top to create definition in the clouds. It's a very subtle detail, but it adds some dimension to the sky. I'm going to work on this painting in layers, starting with broad shapes, colours and values, then slowly building up texture and details, letting each layer dry before I start the next. This is an approach in art that involves working general to specific. So I'll start with big shapes, neutral mid-tone colours, then slowly introduce more specific details, highlights and shadows. I like this approach because it allows me to find the scene in the loose representation of shape and colour that I've created on the paper as I go. So I'm going to start by establishing some neutral mid-tone colours on the hill that will show through when I come to layer highlights and shadows later on. I start with a neutral green tone that I mix using permanent green, a little bit of ivory black to neutralise the mix, a bit of burnt umber to add an earthy tone, a small amount of yellow ochre and titanium white. Tones often appear more neutral in life than we initially perceive, which is why I add these colours to tone down the mix before applying it to the paper. It's also easier to start with a more neutral tone, then build up the levels of saturation slightly in small doses. This brings a sense of focus to the colourful areas that stand out. All I'm doing for this first layer is filling in the outline of the shape that I drew for the hill. I do this with my square brush, and I've loaded the brush with a fair amount of water. Then I'm using my round brush to dot in small triangle shapes to represent the silhouettes of fir trees on the top of the hill. I'm using this stippling action because I want the fir tree triangles to look quite organic in shape. Because they're far away, we're not going to see the details, so I want them to almost look as if they're blending into the sky. The next part of the blocking in stage involves outlining the fir trees, which sit in the mid-ground of the painting in front of the hill. For this colour, I add a tiny bit of ivory black and quite a lot of water to get this translucent shadow mix. Then I use my small square brush to start to create texture of the leaves and branches of the trees. To create this texture, I use a relatively dry brush. So I pick up the colour from the palette, remove some excess moisture on a paper towel, then hold the brush so the bristles are horizontal and dab side to side to make the appearance of branches tapering up to the top of the trees. When using the dry brush technique, the bristles of the brush often separate into clumps due to the dry paint sticking them together. I use the shape of the brush when it is partially dried this way to build leaf texture around the branches. I'm going to continue to darken parts of the hill. The shadows are cool green in tone. I've added some green to this shadow mix on my palette and continue to layer the dark tones on top of one another. I quickly want to tell you about the drawing course I created. It's an online course designed for beginners that covers the fundamentals of drawing, then progresses to showing you how to create realistic portrait drawings through practical online sessions. Through 55 lessons, I will help you build your skills up from complete beginner to drawing portraits like this, through practicing how to control the pencil, improving line quality and composition, constructing complex forms and proportions from scratch, and perfecting your shading. So if you're a complete beginner and not really sure where to start, this course is an all-in-one program that will take you from the absolute basics to more advanced techniques so that you can have a skill that you can enjoy for a lifetime. I'd absolutely love to have you join me. I put a link in the description so you can check out the details. I use the same colour but with less paint on the brush and more water added to block in the broad reflection shape of the hill and trees. I'm using the square brush because the water reflections are going to mirror the colours but in a way that appears more abstract, with slightly darker values. Now I'm going to pause the video for a second and tell you about the colours I've mixed on my palette. I established the shapes and textures of some shadows in the trees, water and hill, so I'm ready to start layering brighter colours over the top. With gouache, you can layer lighter colours over darker colours due to the pigment density and opacity of titanium white in the mix. So from the top left, this colour which I'll use for the darker tones in the distant orange coloured trees and some of the edges of the fir trees where they have browned. This was a mixture of burnt umber, a bit of spectrum red, a little bit of ivory black and a dot of yellow ochre. I'm making sure to mix quite a bit of each colour with my palette knife because I'll use these mixes to blend with one another to make all the other variations of tones in the painting. This keeps the colours looking harmonious. Then for the brighter orange beneath that, I mix the same colours but with some primary yellow and titanium white added. Below that bright orange colour, there's an earthy yellow-orange colour which I just mixed with yellow ochre and titanium white. Then the bottom colour on the left side of the palette is a mix of primary yellow, titanium white and a small amount of yellow ochre and then the tiniest dot of the green shadow tone I already mixed to neutralise it a bit. Then on the right hand side, I've got my shadow tones. The one at the bottom is the mix I already created of green, ivory black and a hint of burnt umber. Then the one at the top is more of a sap green colour that I made with green, ivory black, a small amount of ochre and some primary yellow. Using the top right hand green colour, I start to layer on some more saturated green tones in the hills. I'm thinking about how the trees appear in clusters of lighter shades and shadow tones. So I mix some titanium white with a small amount of this green tone, then I use a dotting action to create the appearance of light reflecting off of some of the leaves at the top of these trees. There is a lighter patch at the top of the hill where the light from behind it is diffused across it, so I establish where the lighter section will be here. This part of the process is about blocking in the base colours with neutral midtones before adding the highlights, shadows and details. It's good practice to work from broad shapes and colours to specific details when layering paint, so you can refine as you go. I add some of the red tone over the top of the green to represent the red autumn trees. I'm dotting these distant clusters of leaf textures with my round brush as I want to be precise about the placement. I use some of this orange-red tone for the outlines of some fir trees on the right-hand side of the composition. Then I start to build up some of the lighter green tones on the fir trees, using the round brush to detail branches. The branches get progressively smaller the higher up the tree. Each branch curves downwards, away from the trunk, and then up again slightly. I'm using a slight stippling action with the brush, so I'm varying the pressure I apply slightly along each branch to create the appearance of thick needles lining the branch. The trees are darker in the middle and lighter and more saturated green around the edge. This is due to the light source being behind the trees and backlighting them. The foliage around the edge of the foreground trees is lighter green-yellow in colour. I used a mid-green mix at the top right of my palette and combined it with some of the lighter yellow colour on the left. I want to establish where some of the highlight tones will be so I can gauge where to place other lighter values. I'm still using my round brush. The great thing about this round brush is the tapered tip. The size of the brush is a 4, so it's not the smallest brush you can get, but it means it can hold more water and it gives you the flexibility to vary the thickness of your lines. I'm dotting this light yellow-green highlight tone around the left-hand side of the bank around the trees where the light is shining through the valley of the hill. Now I've established where the shadows, highlights and where the different colours and tones will be with the blocking in technique, so now I'm going to refine these areas to create the illusion of details. I want to create the appearance of light hitting the tops of the clusters of trees, so I'm dotting in some of the light yellow-green at the tops of the trees to show where the light is hitting them. It's a process of refining and iterating. There's a lot of back and forth with creating highlights, then further defining the clusters of trees on the hill by painting the shadows that are being cast. For the shadow tone, I used the ivory black green mix that I've added quite a bit of water to increase the transparency so that it adds a glaze of darkness rather than an overpowering opaque darkness. Often shadows have reflected light in them, so this is a good way to create shadow tones that are not absolutely dark. This is the point of the painting where I feel ready to alter the colour profiles of the foliage on the hill. I'm adding more highlight tones, adding more red tones, and then defining them with more shadows. Then I move on to creating the foliage in the foreground bushes and trees on the bank of the lake on the right hand side of the composition. I'm dotting more saturated green midtones and highlight tones from my palette to create the highlights in the fir trees and the bushes beneath. For the brightest and lightest yellow colour, I've added some more primary yellow to the light green tone on my palette with some extra titanium white. I'm using this to add contrast and show where the light is hitting the plants. I use a dotting or stippling technique in quite an organic way to create the appearance of leaves. Now I'm ready to paint some details in this section, so I'm going to add some orange fir tree shapes which are behind the trees in the foreground. I'm using this earthy orange tone, then I add some more saturated midtones and highlights to bring some variation to the hues of the trees. I've got an autumn rainbow on my palette and I want to use some more warm colours like the reds, oranges and buttery yellows to detail sections of foliage. I'm not overdoing these warm colours because I want these to be colours that stand out in the composition through the contrast of there being less of them. Now for the part of the painting that feels a bit more expressionistic. I'm creating the water reflections by using all the colours on my palette that I mix for the tree tones and then mirroring the image in the water below. Of course, the water obscures the details and makes colours look darker, so I'm using my small flat brush to abstractly paint the reflections in thick strokes and I'm not overthinking the details. It's quite fun to paint loosely like this, and it takes the pace of painting up a notch as I come closer to completing it. I'm dabbing on paint for the earthy orange, the darker green and the brighter yellow-green highlights. The reason why I painted this dark backdrop to block in the reflection of the hill first instead of painting directly is because gouache colours tend to dry slightly transparently, so the dark background shines through and makes the tones appear more harmonious and realistic. I'm using a dark green colour from my palette and a relatively dry brush to create the reflections of the tops of the trees. These brush strokes look quite expressionistic because I'm focusing on creating texture instead of detail. Then I'll work on adding some bright ripples in the water closer to the viewer. For the ripples, I've used a similar mix to the sky mix, which was just white with a dot of ivory black in it. I'm painting the ripples with thick strokes because they're closer to the viewer to obscure the edges of the hill and tree reflections. And there we have it, an autumn scene on the lake. Let me know in the comments if you tried creating this painting for yourself, or if you've got any ideas for painting tutorials you want to see. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.